Just a quick note after I already recorded this video. I just want to say that this video will be kind of my reaction and analysis in one. I've already seen it once, but only once, so please forgive me if I don't get every single one of the references. There also won't be much editing since I'm only watching the video and talking about it. But with that said, let's get to the video. So, in this video, I will watch and analyze this new teaser, which is absolutely crazy and filled with lore. I normally don't really do these teaser analysis anymore, but this one is so important that I decided I need to make a video about this one. Most people won't understand this teaser, which is why I am surprised that they decided to release this, since they just recently began to put the Shade lore into the main quests, and until recently it was all in the lore books and stuff. And I think that still most people don't even know what shades are, probably won't recognize most of them. And I've even seen some people not recognize Pierro, which surprises me, but alas, that's how it is. Anyway, as always, this is just my interpretation of the lore, and my interpretation may be a bit different from others, so please keep that in mind. Also, this is my kinda live analysis, so I will be stopping a lot, and I also be returning to some points if I miss something or if I remember that I should have mentioned something that I didn't. So now let's play the video. And in just these first few frames we can see these two birds. One of them was probably something like a crow or some kind of bird like that, and the other is some kind of white bird. This probably symbolizes some sort of transition and different perspectives, which could be pointing at Rhinedottir and her so-called experiment that she is doing right here. This older lady is probably at least made in the image of Anya Ender's daughter, who was one of the Vexen Circle witches, but in the present she is no longer alive, since she died of old age probably. Since this is Rhinedottir's experiment, it's possible that she just made this kind of dimension or something where Anya is alive and is reading this book.
This world has always been so.
And I will stop right here. As you probably heard at this point, her voice even sounds a lot like the voice of M, so it makes a lot of sense that since Rhinedottir created this experiment, that Anya could be the one who is reading these stories here, and they are also stories, which was kind of her thing. Also, the first one we see here is the Shade of Life, Naberius, who recently got merged together with Rhinedottir, or rather Rhinedottir devoured her heart, which means that she now is in control of Naberius, and this is Naberius's past appearance, which means that the one we see later is actually Rhinedottir's appearance, but in the past Naberius looked like this. And as I said, Rhinedottir is now the one in control, but Naberius is still kind of in the back of her mind and can speak to her.
Bides no reason. For none are born by their own consent. Death abides no reason, for it cannot be defied, even by those who see it coming.
Now this is obviously Renova, probably the one we are most familiar with, since she played quite a big role in Natlan's Archon quests. And again, I'm quite surprised that they decided to drop all of this, because most people will probably not recognize that Naberius is the Shade of Life, or even know that this is about the concept of shades. It's interesting that Renova right here is depicted with these wings, which obviously we are familiar with because of the statue of the omnipresent god that is in Inazuma. A lot of people in the past speculated that these might be connected to Raiden A or Raiden Makoto. We also had some speculations about the statue being connected to Istaroth, which all turned out to be false in the end, since it is clearly connected to Renova, and Raiden A actually has a voice line that could be the reason that is. She talks about something she witnessed during the Cataclysm 500 years ago, and that could be Renova's wings, or rather Renova herself. Also, this exact same symbolism is depicted in the Staff of Homa, and obviously also in Arlecchino's design, which is inspired both by the Crimson Moon and Renova, it seems. Maybe there is some connection between these two that we don't know about yet. And maybe even the Raiden Shogun's abilities are a bit inspired by her, like this huge eye that we see above, that could be connected to her skill, but I think I'm reaching too much in this one, so I digress.
time abides no reason. For it deprives.
So this is obviously Istaroth. This is the first time we see her. This is the shade that we knew about for the longest time, since she's mentioned by name in Before Sun and Moon.
Us all equally, yet brooks not a second to be reclaimed. Space above.
Now, this is a big surprise for many people, but it was theorized for a while that maybe the ruler of space, or rather the ruler of void, as she's sometimes called, could be the sustainer of heavenly principles or the unknown god, and it turned out to be true. Even in the past Archon quest, it was heavily suspected, but right here it's definitely confirmed that she is the ruler of space, finally, and it's even said in this short animation. But now I want to talk a bit about the abides no reason part, which is mentioned for every single of these shades. The reason part is pretty interesting, since the primordial one is supposed to indicate reason. In most of the time the primordial one is mentioned in lore, and that is pretty interesting, since this could symbolize that reason, or the primordial one, is separated from these 4 shades. Or it could just be a random sentence that sounds cool, but anyway.
Abides no reason. The ruler of space stopped the golden-haired twin travelers and mercilessly tore them apart.
This is obviously a reference to the beginning of the game, and I think everyone who watches this will be pretty familiar with this scene, with the stars and all. What's more surprising is that she's the ruler of space, but I already talked about that. Anyway, this is pretty interesting, since if this is a experiment made by Rhinedottir, then maybe she created this scene to see what would happen if someone read these stories about the shades, which could be classified as something like the forbidden knowledge, probably, because, well, just reading the forbidden text Before Sun and Moon destroyed basically an entire nation and killed Orobashi. So I think that reading this text could have destroyed this old lady if she was real. She probably wasn't, but it could have been some part of an experiment made by Rhinedottir, as is said later. And it looks like Renova was the one who intervened here. And here we obviously see Renova and get a pretty good look at her wings and the eyes in it. What's also interesting is the triquetra on her design, which seem to be part of all the celestial designs so far in the game, including Paimon, which is also pretty important in this video too.
Naberius... no. This looks more like Rhinedottir's doing.
And her mentioning Rhinedottir is obviously in reference to what we heard in the Paralogism Archon quest, where it was mentioned that Naberius, or rather Rhinedottir, devoured Naberius and merged with her, which means that, yeah, this right here is Rhinedottir, indicated by the golden markings and golden thingy behind her head. When Naberius is in control, it turns blue. And that also means that most of the time, as I said, Rhinedottir is in control, which includes the moment right here.
Please don't litter other people's spaces with your bizarre creations.
Unsurprisingly, all life here has been rendered unstable, tainted by the ruler of space. I have seen enough to know that repeating this experiment.
And this is what I talked about this being an experiment. She literally mentions it right here, but we don't really know what that means. It could be just that she created these people and put them in this situation to see what would happen, and it could just be that she created the birds, for example, or something. We really don't know, but it seems like she created this situation to see what would happen if someone read the text.
Experiment would be fruitless. You seem to wield my power as if it were nothing.
Now that we can see her design pretty closely, I can talk about her eyes, which are interesting because they have different colors. And also they depict the X and Y chromosomes, as you can see here and here. which is pretty interesting since she is the ruler of life, and you can also see the DNA here in the back. Also, as I said before, this is Rhinedottir and not Naberius, or rather the appearance is of Rhinedottir and not Naberius.
But a plaything for your amusement. Although merging with you has stripped me of agency, I shall still continue to voice my disapproval.
There you can very clearly see that Naberius is symbolized by the blue color, while Rhinedottir is symbolized by the golden color. Also, this is pretty Kandrian attire.
My dear Rhinedottir, you have my respect, Naberius. Your nagging is one of the only things that can get under my skin.
So here it seems like Rhinedottir admits that Naberius still kind of influences her mind since they merged, but she really seems like she's the one in control.
And you, Istaroth? Why did you bestow history upon them?
So this is our first look at Istaroth up close. It's kind of hard to say who she means by them. It could be about the Traveler or something, but it could also just be about this singular experiment made by Rhinedottir. That would also make a lot of sense. And later in this teaser, you can hear that her voice actor for all the languages, including English of course, is the same as Venti's VA, which adds a bit to the theories that Venti and Istaroth are connected somehow. Because Venti is described as one of the 1000 winds, and Istaroth is described as the 1000 winds of time.
I had to find some way to pass the time, did I not? After all, it's clear that Asmodee is not here.
This is actually the first time we hear about Asmodee, like straight up being mentioned. But way back in the past, it was datamined, I think, that the name of the sustainer in the files was Asmodee, but it wasn't official, so not many people really took it seriously. But now we can see that that was actually correct.
Well, perhaps you could share your input a little earlier next time. But you're right. There's no trace of Asmodee here.
Also, a lot of people mentioned that this tree looks a lot like Windrise, and it may have actually been.
Where has she gone? Anyway, it's time I put this space out of its misery.
This scene is also pretty interesting since she literally says that she kills the space, which means that maybe the authority of death also extends to things and not only living beings. But that's just how it seems to me. This is also a pretty interesting scene, since if you look closely, there seems to be some sort of space rubble or something in the back. So this implicates that this is in space. There have been theories about different dimensions in Teyvat, and there it seemed like the cube was the dimension that got destroyed here. So maybe all of these cubes are different dimensions that maybe contain different situations.
These meetings are just a formality. Does it really matter that only 3 of us are here?
I, for one, think that we should find her. Since the heavenly principles cast...
Also, this scene could be inside of Celestia, since we really don't know how it looks inside of all the places. And we only saw one of the places in the manga, and it looked like a giant coliseum, but this clearly looks different. And I don't know where else could they really be. And it also reminds me that some people noticed that the thing behind Rhinedottir's head looks a lot like the flower that Albedo puts down with his skill, so that's also interesting. And the stairs kind of remind me of the stairs that led us down in the ruins of Natlan.
Us as shades. Not one of us has ever missed a meeting.
What if she just switched sides? Finding her would do more harm than good.
Now there's an interesting idea. Better than being devoured.
Just switched sides? You make it sound like such a trivial affair. We are shades, shadows of the heavenly principles. It's unthinkable. Unless she loves her new master more than her own self.
This obviously seems like a hint at the fact that Paimon could be Asmodee, or the sustainer of the heavenly principles, which was theorized by the community for a long time at this point. And at first it seemed more like a very surface level theory that was too obvious to be true, but now it seems like it may actually be true, since this all hints at Paimon, who has very similar symbolism in her design as Asmodeus, or rather Asmodee, with the trichetras and all. And also it would make a lot of sense, since I don't know of any other person who could qualify as a master than the Traveler. And also we've seen in multiple scenes that Paimon has taken a lot of liking to the Traveler, so I think it fits pretty well.
Renova, do you know that you're being watched?
By whom? Whose gaze could pierce this far?
It seems pretty crazy to me that Pierro was able to somehow gaze upon the gods from all the way down in Notcry, and especially on such an important meeting. It's hard to say how much he actually saw or heard, but the fact alone that he was able to watch Renova is pretty crazy. And it seems from all we have seen and heard that he holds a pretty huge grudge against Renova and against Celestia in general, so maybe we will see some of his hatred and his plan to overthrow Celestia in Notcry.
I remember those eyes. It was just before I placed the curse of immortality.
Yes, and as Capitano told us before, Renova was the one who cursed Canrians with immortality, and he made it very clear that she was the one who was responsible for his suffering and the suffering of his people, which is also why he went to get revenge to Natlan in the end.
Ah, yes. He's an old acquaintance of mine.
We know that in Canria, Pierro was the royal mage, and he was the one who warned the sages that doing what they were planning to do will result in a catastrophe, which actually happened, as we can see here. And Rhinedottir was living in the same age as Pierro, so she probably knew him.
I'm sure that working for the Tsaritsas helped him let go of his past obsessions.
The Cryo Archon. With her paltry powers, she dares set her gaze on the heavenly principles.
It's interesting that in this short video, Renova seems pretty loyal to the heavenly principles, and we know that in the past she overstepped her authority as a shade, and that displeased the heavenly principles. So she, as the Lord of the Night says, succumbed to her self-pity, which maybe resulted in her now being very loyal to the heavenly principles and also kind of scared of them, and being very strict with her rules.
The heavenly principles have yet to awaken. If I were her, I wouldn't pass on that opportunity either. My dear Rhinedottir, you know, I cannot allow you to think that way.
And this right here is the reason why I think that Naberius still has some influence on Rhinedottir, since Rhinedottir is obviously one of the sinners and probably isn't on very good terms with Celestia and the heavenly principles, so she probably wouldn't be very opposed to the idea of overthrowing them. But Naberius seems to have some effect on her and maybe even changing her mind on some things, but it's hard to say how much influence she actually has.
It was purely hypothetical, Naberius.
For lack of a direct order, I say it's time we intervened. Of course, to the extent permitted by the rules.
So we don't really know what they were gonna intervene with, but if I had to guess, it would probably be creating the new moon or something in Notcry, whatever the Fatui are planning with the moon and with the firmament, as was mentioned in the teasers. It seems like something that Celestia wouldn't really like.
The gaze of the gods has always been considered a blessing. Hence the origin and meaning of visions. People have always yearned for the gaze of the gods. And yet, it is said that when...
It's interesting that the idea of visions actually not being a good thing, or the gaze of the gods not actually being a good thing, was expressed in the past in many places in some lore texts, and for example by Rhinedottir, who said that having a vision is something like a curse, if I remember correctly.
Mortals look directly upon the gods, they invite their wrath and retribution. And what of it? Lives will be lost. A nation brought to ruins. So be it. It is nothing I have not endured before.
There it almost seems like Pierro is ready to sacrifice not Cry or maybe even Snezhnaya if it came down to it.
I already know the price of gazing upon the gods. So tell me, what is the price of killing a god?
There it seems obvious that Pierro's goal, or Pierro's final goal, is to kill the divine or overthrow the heavenly principles. And since no one has been able to do it until now, it's hard to say what the price for that is, and if it is even possible to, for example, kill one of the shades, or even the heavenly principles.
The god stays silent, as if the thought had never once crossed his mind. To all those who dare not look up to the...
And this place that he actually is in may be Nasha town, which was described to us in one of the events as being a town in Not Cry. Also all the places that he passed by seem to be from Not Cry, so we got a pretty good tease at what it may look like.
Heavens, Her Majesty the Tsaritsa says this. Behold. Even the gods have their limits.
Inspection over. Return to your posts.
Make sure the Frostmoon Scions don't pose a threat.
Per the Pale Star Edict, we are to retrieve the damselette from Nod Cry, whatever it takes.
Yes, and as was speculated by many people, me included, we'll definitely be meeting Columbina in Not Cry, and she'll probably play a major role there. It also seems like she will be the next Harbinger we engage in battle, since the Fatigue Constellation wheel indicates that, and it so far seems to be pretty accurate, her possible connections to the moon and to the series and stuff, since she seems like a pretty important Harbinger that we know next to nothing about. Anyway, that's it for the teaser. I don't really have many things I want to talk about. I just want to mention that I really like this teaser. It was out of nowhere, but I think it's more fun that way. And also I really like all of the designs, but I wouldn't expect any of the shades to be playable anytime soon. Not before the end of Snezhnaya anyway. I think that a lot of people are very excited to see them in the game, but maybe we will see them, but I don't think there's any chance of any of them being playable in Not Cry. That just seems too much of a stretch and too early to be true. Anyway, this was my quick analysis of this teaser. I hope that I didn't bore you to death. I don't think I added anything crazy about this teaser, and if you want to learn more about the shades, you can check out my previous video that I made on them, where I explained the basics and lore surrounding them. But with that said, that will be all for this short video, so take care and I'll see you in the next one.